My name is Leah Morgan. I'm 32, an independent visual artist, and I live alone in a quiet apartment just outside Minneapolis. Every morning, I walk 3 blocks to my studio with a thermos of black coffee and a scarf around my neck, green wool, frayed at the edges. My mother gave it to me 5 years ago. Her version of an apology she never said out loud. Most days are soft now. Quiet. Controlled. I like it that way. Last week, I baked blueberry scones before visiting my parents. It was my dad's favorite. I wrapped them carefully, folded a napkin over the top. I even wore the scarf. I parked a little farther down the street than usual. From the driveway, the house looked the same. Blue shutters, maple tree out front, porch swing still broken. I didn't expect anything to change. But that morning, something finally broke. And this time, it wasn't me. I was the 3rd child. The quiet one. The one who colored inside the lines and made straight A's without being asked. In the Morgan household, silence wasn't golden, it was invisible. And I mastered it early. My sister, Vivian, was the crown jewel. Valedictorian. Varsity cheer captain. The one Mom called her miracle. When Vivian walked into a room, everyone stood straighter. Brighter. I learned to step sideways so the light could hit her better. There's a photo wall in the hallway of our childhood home. Every frame tells a story. Vivian at her piano recital. Vivian's graduation. Vivian and Dad on a ski trip in Tahoe. When I was 17, I asked Mom if she had any photos of me she wanted to hang. She smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Next time, sweetheart." Next time never came. Even back then, I kept my head down. I didn't rebel. I didn't push back. I earned scholarships. I worked 2 jobs during college. I came home for holidays, always with gifts wrapped neatly and a willingness to help clean up afterward. When the family's lake cabin nearly went into foreclosure, I sold a piece from my first gallery show and wired $43,000 to save it. No one asked me to. No one said thank you, either. But I told myself that love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just assumed. Growing up, I convinced myself that if I became useful enough, I'd eventually become visible. I offered. I contributed. I stayed late to help. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny and clapped at wins I had no part in. Vivian once told her friends I was the artsy one, with a tone that landed somewhere between amused and apologetic. I laughed along. Of course I did. When Mom hosted dinner parties, she asked me to bring dessert, never to stay. Just drop it off, Leah. You know how chaotic it gets. I dropped it off. At age 29, when I had a solo show in New York, no one in my family came. Dad said the timing didn't work. Vivian sent a thumbs up emoji. I hung their names on the guest list anyway. Just in case. I used to think I was born into the wrong family. That some hospital nurse made a mistake and swapped me with someone else's baby. But then I'd see traces of myself in Dad's cheekbones, in Mom's long fingers, in the sharp way we all smiled when we were tired. No, I wasn't a mistake. I just wasn't the version of me they wanted. The scones were still warm when I stepped into the house. Vivian's voice echoed from the kitchen, sharp, practiced, always 1 decibel above everyone else. She was in full performance mode, detailing her firm's expansion into Portland. Dad sat at the head of the table like a CEO during a quarterly report. Mom stood by the china cabinet, arranging napkins that were already straight. No one looked up. I hovered in the doorway for a moment before setting the scones at the far end of the table. Blueberry, I said, more to myself than anyone. Dad's favorite. Vivian didn't pause. She raised her wine glass and redirected the conversation, as if I hadn't spoken at all. Dad nodded slowly, doing that thing men do when they aren't really listening but don't want to admit it. I waited for a break in the noise. When it finally came, I said, the gallery opening went well. Over 200 guests showed up. Tribune even did a write-up. Vivian raised a hand mid-sentence. Dad, tell them about that investor from Chicago. The one who's offering you a seat at the Rotary. Huge deal. He leaned back, folded his arms, and smiled. Good kid. Reminds me of someone who listens. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was absolute. I smiled tightly and looked down at my plate. The scones were cooling. I thought you might want one, I said again, gently sliding the plate closer to him. Mom finally turned to me, her tone wrapped in honey but filled with splinters. Leah, you've always been performative. Even when you were little, everything had to be a show. I blinked. I wasn't trying to perform. You don't need a crowd to be proud of yourself, sweetie. The word sweetie scraped. Then Dad looked up from his tablet and, in the calmest voice I've ever heard, said, if we're being honest, we weren't ready for a third child. That's not your fault, but it changed everything. There it was. The thing you always fear someone might say. The thing you never expect they'll say out loud. Mom didn't flinch. She just folded her napkin and said, we said we regret it. That doesn't mean we don't love you. Don't twist it. Vivian didn't even look at me. You always overreact. I stared at the plate of scones, now cold and untouched. My coffee had gone bitter in my mouth. My face flushed hot. I stood slowly. The chair scraped loud against the hardwood floor. I need some air. No one followed. The hallway felt smaller than I remembered. I walked past the photo wall, saw frame after frame of family memories, Vivian's wedding, her baby, their lake trip. No photos of me. Not even my college graduation, the one where Dad stood beside me, arm around my shoulder. That picture used to hang in the center. Now, just a pale square of dust where it used to be. Like a tooth pulled from a smile. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even say goodbye. The air outside hit my skin like glass, cold, sharp, and oddly clarifying. I walked slowly to my car, scone still in hand, now slightly crushed from how tightly I'd been gripping the tote. The drive home blurred past storefronts and intersections I didn't really see. At one point, I realized I had turned off the radio without noticing. I just needed the silence. Back in my apartment, I didn't take off my coat. I stood in the doorway, holding the bag of scones like a fragile artifact from a different life. The scent of blueberries, once sweet, now made my stomach turn. I placed them on the kitchen counter and stepped back. The scarf was still around my neck. I unwrapped it slowly, hung it on the hook beside the door. Then I stared at the empty hook next to it, the one I always saved for guests. It hadn't held anything in months. Everything looked the same. Nothing felt the same. I walked to my dresser and opened the bottom drawer. It groaned from disuse. Inside were scattered fragments of a life I had kept buried, birthday cards, old letters, sketches from college, and a diary with a faded red cover. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, carpet rough beneath my skin, and flipped the diary open. The pages were worn, my handwriting looping and careful, like I thought the neatness would make the words matter more. I stopped on one line written in purple ink. Someday I'll matter enough for them to regret nothing. I blinked slowly, not from tears, just exhaustion. I closed the book, leaned back against the dresser, and stared at the ceiling. And then, like a match struck in the dark, a memory surfaced. I was 9. It was the night of my birthday. I had crept downstairs, half hidden behind the floral curtain that separated the kitchen from the hall. I wanted to ask Mom if I could open my second gift early. I was still clutching the red ribbon from the first one. But before I could speak, I heard her voice. We should have stopped at 2, she said, soft but steady. I don't have it in me to keep pretending. Dad's voice followed, flat. Too late now. She's here. Just try not to let her feel it. I hadn't thought of that moment in years. Maybe I'd buried it. Maybe it had been echoing inside me all along. That night, I smiled through cake cutting. I posed for pictures with frosting on my cheek. I thanked them for the party like the good girl I always tried to be. They didn't know I'd heard. Or maybe, they just didn't care. I opened the diary again. Turned to the back page. I wrote one line in fresh ink. I won't ask to be seen anymore. Then I closed the book and put it away. For the first time, not to hide it. But because I didn't need it to speak for me anymore. Sunday came with a text. 3 words from Mom. No greeting. No apology. Sunday brunch. Confirmed. I stared at the screen for a full minute before tossing the phone onto the counter. My scarf still hung by the door, untouched. I considered ignoring the message. Letting them feel my absence. But part of me needed to know if they'd pretend like nothing had happened. They did. The cafe was all white linens, tiny vases, and soft jazz, designed for appearances. I arrived 10 minutes early, out of habit. The hostess guided me past the main dining room to a small table by the play corner. "For the Morgan party," I said. She checked her tablet. "Yes, Ms. Leah Morgan." "This way." I froze. "I'm not at the main table?" She smiled politely. "You're listed for the side table." It was a two-top, tucked behind a decorative divider. I could still hear their laughter, but I wasn't part of it. "Not really." I sat. Folded my napkin. Tried not to shake. 10 minutes later, Dad tapped a glass and offered a lukewarm toast about family and opportunity. Then Mom stood, lifted her mimosa, and said, "Here's to Vivian's promotion and to Miles, soon to be a part of our family. You two are our greatest joy." Not a single glance in my direction. Not a word. When dessert came, I excused myself and went to the restroom. The mirror was too clean. Too bright. The woman staring back at me looked like a guest in her own life. Even here, I thought, they need me to be invisible to keep their image intact. Back at the table, Vivian leaned in, perfume sharp and smile sharper. "You know they only invited you so you wouldn't cause a scene, right?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The drive home was quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that hums beneath your skin. I didn't even take off my coat when I got back. Just stood in the middle of my living room, as if the walls were holding their breath. My phone buzzed. An email. Subject, Trust Structure, Carver Family Holdings. Sender, law firm I hadn't heard from in years. I opened it. Bullet points. Legal terms. Dry language. But one line pulled the air from my lungs. Vivian Carver to serve as sole trustee and inheritor of the Lake Eden estate. My name wasn't there. I sat down slowly. Blinked. Reread. Nothing changed. Hands trembling, I opened the side drawer and pulled out the manila envelope I hadn't touched in years, Lake Eden receipts. Title transfer. My handwriting. The year I gave them $43,000 to save that cabin. I was 26, still working out of a shared studio and living off black coffee and hope. I remembered Mom's voice when she hugged me that day. "You'll always have a home there." A lie. Or a line she told herself so she wouldn't feel like she was using me. I called Dad. "When were you planning to tell me about the trust update?" My voice was flat. He paused. "Leah, it's complicated. You've been distant." Vivian's voice cut in from the background. "Just tell her it's finalized." She wouldn't understand anyway. I hung up. No goodbye. No rage. Just silence. And silence, I was learning, could be sharp. I walked to the kitchen. Took out the envelope. Spread the documents on the counter like cards in a final hand. They had erased me on paper. Now, it was my turn to write myself back in. I didn't sleep that night. The documents sat on my kitchen counter, lit only by the faint silver of moonlight slipping through the window. My old receipts. The title transfer. My signature, my parents' signatures, every line notarized and dated. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger anymore. Just clarity. At sunrise, I called Mr. Halverson, my late uncle's attorney and one of the few people who ever treated me like I belonged. His voice cracked slightly when he answered. "Leah," he said. "It's been a long time. I need proof," I told him. From 2012. Lake Eden cabin. My contribution. He didn't hesitate. "I'll check the archive. Give me an hour." An hour later, I had it, a notarized letter confirming my $43,000 contribution toward the cabin's purchase. I printed it. Placed it in a folder. Then I got dressed. Plain navy blouse. Dark slacks. No jewelry. No softness. I wasn't coming to make peace. I drove to my parents' house slowly, letting the silence fill the car like armor. When I pulled into the driveway, the curtains shifted. They were watching. Mom opened the door like she was expecting a package, not her daughter. "Leah," she said, tone flat. Vivian stood behind her, coffee in hand, eyes amused. I walked past them, straight to the dining table. I placed the folder down carefully. "I'm not here for tea," I said. Dad looked up from his phone but didn't speak. "You removed me from the trust," I said calmly. "While I was recovering from surgery. Without my knowledge." Vivian rolled her eyes. "You were barely coherent." "We did what was best for the family." "For the family," I echoed. "That I helped support. That I helped save." I opened the folder and laid out the documents, each one like a quiet blade. "This is my contribution. This is my signature. And this," I pulled out the final page, "is from Mr. Halverson, confirming everything." Dad rubbed his forehead. Mom sat down slowly. Vivian said nothing. "You didn't just forget me," I said. "You edited me out." Silence stretched across the room. "We'll talk to our lawyer," Mom finally said. "No," I replied. "You'll hear from mine." I picked up my bag. My hands didn't shake. At the door, I paused, just once. "I won't ask to be included again." Then I walked out. No one followed. 3 weeks passed. I didn't reach out. Didn't check in. The silence was deliberate, mine, not theirs. This time, it didn't feel like exile. It felt like choice. Then one morning, an unexpected email arrived. The sender, Arthur LaRue, my father's longtime estate attorney. Subject, something your father wanted you to have. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a brief message. "He tried to reach you last year, before his bypass. I have a document he left behind. If you're willing, I think it's time. No pressure. No guilt. Just, adore." I responded with one line. Thursday. 10 a.m. Arthur's office was quiet, paneled in warm oak, like time had stopped somewhere in 1984. He didn't speak much, just handed me a sealed envelope. I opened it slowly. At the top of the page was my father's handwriting. "To Leah, because I finally saw who really held this family together." It wasn't poetic. It wasn't even long. But it was real. Attached was an amendment, signed and notarized, reinstating my name as co-owner of the Lake Eden property. Not just in name, but with full rights. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the paper. For the first time in years, something felt balanced. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house one last time. No folder. No fire. Just a plain white envelope in my coat pocket. Mom answered the door, eyes wary. Dad stood behind her, shoulders stiff. "I'm not here to argue," I said softly. I handed her the envelope. Through the seal, they could see his handwriting. "I thought you should know. The truth wasn't lost. You just didn't want to see it." I turned to leave. "Leah," Dad called out. I stopped. He was sitting on the porch bench, the letter trembling in his hands. His eyes were glassy. His thumb rested beneath one sentence, I finally saw. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Inside, I glimpsed Mom sitting in the hallway, arms folded tight, but her jaw clenched, like she was holding something back. I didn't step inside. I closed the gate behind me. The breeze was gentle. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition. And that was enough. The cabin at Lake Eden was small, but it held everything I needed: quiet, space, and no expectations. I painted the walls a soft clay color, lit the fireplace on slow mornings, and let time move without asking anything of me. Above the mantel, I framed one thing, a torn diary page. The ink had faded, but the words still whispered, "Someday I'll matter." Now, I look at it not with ache, but with peace. Because I do matter. Not because they finally saw me, but because I stopped needing them to. And that was the beginning.